The theme for this evening is a theology of hope and a politics of hope. These could not be, I think, more timely themes. A month ago, the new US Vice President, J.D. Vance, achieved what most theologians fail to do in a lifetime, to make Thomas Aquinas and St. Augustine headline news. Following an interview on Fox News and an extended online spat with the British political commentator Rory Stewart, he launched his version of the patristic medieval Christian order of love into the febrile media stratosphere. His case was that placing the love of family and nation first, and only having loving obligations to others beyond kin and neighbourhood and nation, if there is moral and material resource left when this duty is completed, is not only a natural instinct, but also core Christian teaching. Vance presents this as the political theology of Make America Great Again. Coinciding with the announcement of huge cuts to the US international aid budget, a move with global ramifications, and alongside severe criticism of the motivations of the US Catholic Church for its migrant support work. In this context, the withdrawal from current forms of international humanitarianism is presented as an ordered Christian virtue. This marks, I think, a significant shift in how Catholics in public office talk about local and international social justice commitments. It is also, I think, diametrically opposed to the vision of universal siblinghood or fraternity and social friendship that both Laudato Si and Fratelli Tutti have promoted as the very basis of a politics of hope. In fact, it is arguably a case study in the very diagnosis that Fratelli Tutti offers of a disintegrating politics turned in on itself, promoting a notion of competing, even as Pope Francis calls it, narcissistic localisms, which fail to see the interrelationship, the profound interconnection and co-belonging of the local and the universal. Let us be clear that this is a global phenomena, not solely an American one. Christian social justice work has become gradually more politicized over the last decade. Caritas Internationalis, the Jesuit Refugee Service, amongst others, can testify to this. The works of mercy, the commitment to the structural work for justice, humanitarian relief and development work are increasingly both politicized and weaponized as part of a wider cultural, economic, and political set of conflicts. I say this so starkly at the outset for several reasons. First, it highlights that when we talk this evening about Christian visions for social living, we are addressing ideas already in circulation and argued about in our political life. Christian visions are already active, present, contested, even if not always in a very well-informed way. Secondly, any account we give of Christian hope needs to be able to communicate itself clearly and with conviction in this increasingly fraught context. We cannot afford to be naive about the political deployment of our faith, nor risk countering it with cheap hope. We live in a moment when the choice is not to have a political theology or not, but between rival political theologies whose accounts of love, of hope, and of justice differ widely and sometimes violently. 30 years ago, the secularization thesis taught us that religion was heading towards museum status in the West. That thesis has not aged well. For while formal institutional religious disaffiliation continues in the global North, the political significance of religion rises, and new forms of religious and post-religious practice emerge in both the global North and South. Religious communities also remain amongst the most significant humanitarian providers globally, localising aid and integral development more effectively than many secular agencies. Furthermore, religious belief and practice continue to provide grounds for meaning-making, resistance and resilience to many with limited economic or political resources. In all these ways, religion is far from museum status, and it continues to exist, to thrive, to evolve as a complex, multi-layered and dynamic reality in our contemporary world. It is far more interesting a picture than the secularization thesis would have led us to imagine. Many of us have also been raised on some form or version of the philosophy of liberalism that suggested that the language of virtue, particularly the Christian virtues of faith, hope and love, was a legitimate matter of private belief, but had no place in the neutral, secular public world. The acquired virtues, however, including justice and prudence, remained relevant, but became more agreeable when detached from their infused theological virtues. Liberal politicians have used a language of secular hope, shorn of its theological foundations, in a way that has become closer to simple optimism. This form of political hope as optimism has not endured well and has been supplanted by a politics of anger and resentment. Thus, here we stand in early 2025, at a moment when religion has defied secularization theorists and politics has defied the philosophers of liberalism. And the language of virtue, encompassing faith, hope and love, is resurgent, although it is as contested and as irascible as ever. Significantly, this resurgence in the political claims to virtue on all sides of the political arena occurs just at a moment when people report struggling most with feelings of social hopelessness. The hunger for hope and the absence of hope are critical indicators of our moment's health. As a small illustration, social science researchers have, to my mind convincingly, charted that having some sense of hope for the future correlates with your engagement with civil society, your willingness to vote, and even your health. Correspondingly, those who are vulnerable to feelings of social despair are much more susceptible to misinformation and conspiracy theories. Hope and trust, it turns out, are deeply related. Hope is connected to social trust, to participation in all aspects of social life, and a sense of connection to near and, yes, distant neighbours. For all of these reasons, Pope Francis's dedication of this year to hope is especially timely. In the short time this evening, I would like to respond to this current context that I've tried to set out a little, which I see as marked by both the politicisation of virtue and the hunger for some real, genuine kind of hope, by highlighting several features of a specifically Christian theological account of hope. In what follows, I will highlight three themes that are central to Pope Francis's decree for this Jubilee year. Firstly, that hope is to be understood first and foremost as a gift, rather than something that we ourselves originate. Secondly, hope is for Christians a habitual practice, a way of doing and a way of being. It is not merely a sentiment or a feeling. And finally, that maintaining the habit of hope is connected to our capacity to discern what Pope Francis calls the signs of hope as part of our Christian duty to read the signs of the times. To return for a moment to the very source J.D. Vance was so keen we air, St. Thomas Aquinas. Aquinas treats hope at some length, and what he has to say is, I think, very timely and helpful to us. It's also the grounds on which modern Catholic social teaching on hope, including the writings of Pope Francis, stand. For Aquinas, hope is not a cognitive decision or expectation, but rather a desire or an appetite that all humans have for the good. Aquinas considers hope, and I find this very attractive, Aquinas considers hope to be an appropriately selfish virtue. Hope is for ourselves, and it is for others who share our human condition. While love is the truly benevolent virtue because it desires good without expecting anything in return or counting the cost, hope remains the appropriately selfish virtue. I need it, you need it, it's for me and it's for us. It speaks to what we ourselves need in order to persevere. It's the deeply rooted desire in every human soul that throughout our lives, good and not harm will come to us. And that even if the pathway is rough, we can strive towards some form of real fulfillment for ourselves and for others. Aquinas describes hope as not only an appropriately selfish, but also an irascible passion, because it represents a desire for a worthy good that is still very difficult to attain. It's both worthy and extremely difficult to attain. If the good longed for were easy to achieve, it would not require hope. If it was something we could accomplish effortlessly and without God's assistance, it would not be hope. Hope takes us through a path of difficulty, of struggle, of loss, of failure, and sometimes even of suffering. Yet it remains hope because, although it is difficult to attain, it is still possible to attain. We see injustice, but no, it is not invincible, as Laudato Si states. This represents the crucial tension within a Christian understanding of hope, the difficulty and the possibility of reaching what is truly good for us. Here, recognizing hope as part of our pursuit of the good, albeit arduous, it is essential to comprehend what makes hope possible from a Christian perspective. What makes hope possible in the tradition is not a belief in human progress or the assumption that things will resolve in the end if we just relax and let things unfold. Indeed, Aquinas refers to such assumptions as the enemy of true hope. What makes the good things we rightly hope for possible is that hope is not something initially generated by you and I, by human beings. Rather, hope is a divine gift infused in us. In a sense, this should provide some relief for us this evening in a world where creating feelings of hope on our own can seem near impossible. We receive hope as a gift, but importantly, we are responsible to act upon that gift. In more biblical terms, hope is an acceptance of and trust in a promise of a reality that sustains and transforms our reality. That acceptance and trust in a promise enables us, in the midst of horror and adversity, to enact the signs and the logic of hope. To illustrate this very briefly, 5 years ago, I conducted a series of interviews with refugees living in asylum destitution in London. For protracted periods of up to a decade, those I interviewed had been living without formal immigration status and without a recourse to a right to work or welfare support. They existed on little else other than charitable assistance and a network of other refugees. In talking to them about religion's role in their stories and their journeys, the same passage, rather remarkably, was quoted repeatedly to me. Jeremiah 29. I have a plan for your welfare and not for your harm, for a future with hope, they told me. I was told God has a plan for me, for my welfare and not my harm. If I've not yet reached that place where the plan is clear to me, it is because my story is not yet complete, to quote one man. I have hope because there is a promise that no powers of this world can completely destroy, and because I can tell myself a story which creates a connection between my past, my present, and my future. Talking about these interviews at a conference, I was approached afterwards by 2 prison chaplains who told me of the power of the same Jeremiah narrative for those experiencing imprisonment. It was striking to me to sit with people living hand to mouth, without status, and experiencing the extreme brutality that the modern nation state is capable of, and to be told by them that hope remained a meaningful construct. In fact, the difficulty of their experience intensified, not diminished, hope's meaning. Hope was intensified ultimately because for them it was first and foremost a sustaining theological category. It was a category of God's action that invites from us in return a certain kind of response. 3 things interested me about the hope articulated by those I interviewed, each of which interestingly resonates for me with the classic Christian teaching on hope in Aquinas. As the philosopher Joseph Pieper notes, hope is not the comfortable certainty of possession, but it is necessary because we are creatures who live in time. We live in the agonizing not yet of history. We desire a complete welfare that is not yet fully known or reachable. Hope becomes a more intensely invoked and needed virtue precisely when the gap between the risk of nothingness and destruction and the promise made to us in the covenants of Old and New Testaments seems increased. The more the gap, the more the need for hope. Hope is the entirely appropriate response to the condition of being aware of that gap and living a life that we understand to be on the way, in via, on pilgrimage. Hope is the virtue that places us back in time, not evading, but engaging the sheer difficulty of the world and the sheer gift of the world. Hope sustains our solidarities and struggles for justice and peace. Hope is precisely then the virtue most, rather than least, appropriate for dark times. And when understood in this way, is so clearly not ever to be conflated with optimism, which dismisses or looks away from the gap, or presumption, on the other hand, which refuses to engage with the agony and the difficulty of the gap, leaving it to somebody else. Hope is for us, and it is the virtue appropriate for the condition of living in the gap, stretching in the gap towards justice and peace. In St. Paul's listing, hope sits for good reason between faith and love. Faith leads us to recognize our hope. Hope leads us to the practices of love, and love, in turn, to faith and hope. Secondly, those I interviewed clearly stated that hope for them leads to action, to agency. It gives them a sense of their agency in a situation in which they felt dispossessed of their agency. Hope, which is a gift, invites us into active reception, and no one can take that away from us. It draws us into the great drama of the cooperation between God and humanity. Hope infused in us, leads us into hope's actions. Again, interestingly, social science discussions of hope also make this connection to agency clear. Those who feel they lack agency in the world, feeling that they don't have a capacity to really act in their lives, often report being the most hopeless, while those with a sense that they do have agency maintain more hope, even under difficult and trying circumstances. Thus, we seem to share a natural understanding of what Aquinas alludes to. For Aquinas, it is a question of both what we hope in and what we hope for. The Christian perspective on hope, then, is far less a matter of feeling hopeful and much more about centering ourselves in hope's actions, contemplating how hope moves through us in Christ for a broken world. Laudato Si and Fratelli Tutti outline the practices of hope that we're called to. Theologically, hope arises from a trust that we can always change our direction, that crises that happen in the world can deepen our recognition of our dependence on God and each other, that, as Pope Francis endlessly reminds us, no one is saved alone. They also call us to political actions of hope, learning to redistribute power, wealth, status, prioritising the needs of the poorest, localising power while globalising compassion. Thirdly, since hope allows us to confront the gap between the violence and injustice of the world and our desire deep within every single one of us in our souls for welfare and fulfilment, it follows that hope and fear are never opposites. This reality was evident to those I interviewed. It's also central to Aquinas' account. We live in a time of anxiety, exacerbated, I would argue, by the toxicity of social media. So it's very important for me to clarify that anxiety and fear are not synonymous. They're not the same thing. The theological tradition distinguishes between anxiety, which paralyzes the soul, which escalates and prevents us from engaging with reality, and fear, which can be holy and righteous and a motivator for us to act for the good. I fear not being a good parent, or a good spouse, or a good teacher, or a decent citizen. And that fear should motivate me daily to engage with my students, or my children, or my partner, or my membership of society to strive for excellence in those roles. I fear that the world will succumb to futile conflicts and stray from its true desire for peace, and that the earth's resources will not reach those for whom they were intended by God due to greed or corruption. My fear of these things turns me towards the hope that arises from the promises of God and towards action. It does not paralyze me. Hope, then, is the virtue suited to the risk that things may not turn out well, serving as the antidote to either despair or simplistic optimism in the light of the fact that everything is not well. In his beautiful letter on hope, Spe Salvi, Pope Benedict attempted to encapsulate the essence of Christian hope by, in typical Pope Benedict fashion, explaining what hope is as much as what hope is not. He stated that hope is not the promise or expectation of feelings of private personal satisfaction and happiness that simply endure over time. It is never individualistic, for me, but separated from you. It is not the belief that human societies inevitably progress over time. It is not freedom in this life from all suffering or dependency. Instead, hope, Benedict says, is received, not achieved. We actively adopt hope as a gift, or we refuse it. We have free will to choose or reject participation in hope's ways. Hope is an invitation to a certain kind of habitual action or practice. And hope, he says, is always social, communal, and personal. And it's sustained by three settings: prayer and worship, common action, and the judgment and enacting of justice. In writing a crescendo summary of the virtue tradition on hope that we have explored this evening, Joseph Pieper states, to quote him, "Human hope is directed towards an ultimate and perfect satisfaction of desire. What we truly long for is, as Ernst Bloch quite accurately states, and I love this list, fullness of life, the restoration or healing of man, a homeland, coming home, a kingdom, Jerusalem, the absolute satisfaction of all our needs, and beatitude of a kind we have never known before." End of quote. This is one reason Pope Francis has repeatedly told us that it is virtuous to dream. We have to entertain the vision of a better world in hope so that our habits and our actions can be formed towards that end. To this tradition of thinking about hope, Pope Francis adds a further dimension in his Jubilee writings, suggesting that part of being signs of hope to others is discerning together in community the signs of hope as part of reading the signs of the times. I think this is actually a far trickier and more countercultural ask than we might realise. We are saturated daily with news that makes us feel despair, leaving us with a Hobson's choice of ignoring it in order to restore some mental balance, or engaging with it, but also knowing that the very thing we engage with is a distorted mirror of a wider reality that is so difficult to capture and to comprehend. The philosopher Hannah Arendt says that we come to know the darkness of the times only by the light cast by those lives that give witness to some alternative path. Lives well lived illuminate. The light interprets the dark, enabling us to know it is darkness. And I think Pope Francis shares this insight. A distinctive part of his message over the last 12 years has been to insist that a Catholic belief in the goodness of the created order and the operation of graced goodness in time means that we are called to actively discern the signs of goodness around us. In Fratelli Tutti, he wrote, to quote him, "Good politics combines love with hope and with confidence in the reserves of goodness present in human hearts," end of quote. We're very familiar with Pope Francis's diagnosis of the things that are wrong in our time: the uprootedness of culture, indifference to poverty and suffering, massified, conflictual and commodified cultures. What is less commented upon, but persistently present in his writings, is this constructive call to train our attention on the seeds of goodness, on the signs of the kingdom of God and God's action through God's creatures to redeem and heal, to sustain and to reconcile. Put another way, the habits and practices of hope will be known and visible in their fruits, and we are called not only to social practices of hope, solidarity, justice seeking, a better distribution of goods, care for our planet, but also to discern them together and to celebrate them. This distinctively Christian tradition of reflection on hope challenges one final feature of social despair. We can tell ourselves that our efforts, however well-meaning, are in vain. We can tell ourselves that our efforts will not necessarily bear fruit and will look foolish in the eyes of the world. We do not yet see all the fruits we would long for, it is true. But a final word from Joseph Pieper helps us reinterpret those sentiments in a Christian register. He argues that every single attempt to act in faith, in hope and love, they do not merely keep us going for now, lost or won in the moment. Rather, every act of hope or love in time participates in what is lasting and eternal. He writes, to quote him, "Nothing good, true or beautiful is ever lost. Rather, it is folded into eternity. Apocalyptic prophecy tells us, in the words of von Balthasar, that the world will be harvested and the harvest brought home. A politics of hope acts now, in the gap, based on the promise that is inalienably ours and our neighbours, acting both for time and eternity." Thank you.